Welcome to our mini lecture today on Chapter 3, Culture. In this mini lecture, we're going to look at culture and how it plays a major part in sociology and the understanding of how our society functions. So, culture is the totality of learned customs, knowledge, and objects and behavior. Understanding how we transmit customs, knowledge, material, objects, and behavior across different countries. Culture can include ideas, values, customs, and artifacts. It does not refer to fine arts. But what it does, artifacts from back in the old days, customs of what is acceptable in a certain society, values that are held dear, that's what culture is. All societies have common practices and beliefs. Every society has different ones. How we get those cultures to work together for the prosperization of the world is what's known as innovation, introducing new ideas or objects to culture, bringing that into a society and helping us to be able to adapt to that, to make our society function and make our society something very unique. Globalization is when you have these customs and practice them across national borders, across the world, expanding these things. Globalization today looks a whole lot different than it did back in the old times. Back in the old times, it took forever for things to be able to travel. And nowadays, you've got internet, you've got telecommunication, all these things to be able to transmit culture very quickly. We can know in the United States, within just a matter of minutes, we can know exactly what's happening in other parts of the world. It used to take such a long time for that to be able to happen, but that's globalization. Being able to understand and be able to transmit those customs and traditions across society and throughout the world. There are limits, though, to globalization, and this is mainly through technology. Right? And you also have it where with the limits of globalization spreading from group or society, from group to group and society to society. Yes, it takes a little longer in some instances, and that's part of it. Whenever you're not adapting to change or seeing the change, that is when you have limits to globalization. But nowadays, we're starting to see more of a rapid compared to back whenever sociology was first founded, when it took a little bit longer for things to travel. There are two different types of culture that exist. You have material culture and non-material culture. Understanding material is tangible, non-material is not tangible, meaning material you can touch, non-material you can't. So material, we're talking about food, factories, houses, raw materials. You look, cuisine, okay? Foods that are eaten in certain countries, this is material. Factories, what is produced in different countries. Houses, how people live, and the raw materials to be able to build these things and make the things that the country has. What is eaten over in China may be totally different than what is eaten in India. How people live in housing in Africa is different than housing in England. Raw materials are different all over the world. How we make these things, how we do, that's material. Non-material is your customs, your government, your beliefs, your philosophies, your pattern of communication, your practices, what you do. That is non-material. That's not the tangible things. Culture lag is whenever you have a period of maladjustment, whenever you're having a hard time adapting to new material conditions. One of the things that we can think about here would be like during the time of the Great Depression. When the United States went into a depression, the entire world went into a depression. And this is part of culture lag because it's not necessarily going about at the rapid pace it was. The same thing in 2020 with the coronavirus, where you had a lag at this point of things starting to slow down. Culture language is how cultures communicate. This doesn't necessarily just mean speaking, but also means speaking, writing, gestures, symbols, expressions. This is the thing. What thumbs up in one country might mean good job, but in another country, it could mean something totally different and very disrespectful. These are things, this is what culture language is, being able to understand the language of a certain country and how communication is vital there. Nonverbal communication is, again, as we said, with the gestures, the facial expressions, the visual images, the communication. It's not the same in every culture. Things like crossing your arms can mean pouting and then taking a stance. That's nonverbal communication. Subculture is a group that is different from the dominant culture. They adhere to most ideas, but they do things a little bit different. Sometimes this can include, if we look back to the 1960s and 70s, where you had, in the United States, where you had the hippie movement going on and people who were protesting the Vietnam War. That was something that had not been in our country. We'd always supported our troops, and now we're seeing that not taking place. Counterculture contradicts the dominant norms and values in society and what is accepted. Ethnocentrism is when you assume that one's culture is superior to all other cultures. Basically, with this, you're saying, like as we can see here in this cartoon with imperialism, how and colonization, whenever Britain and European countries had taken over certain nations in Africa. That's what ethnocentrism, believing that your own culture is superior to other cultures. And this is one of the factors that actually led to World War I. Cultural relativism is viewing behavior from the perspective of your own culture. In this cartoon here, we see a Western culture versus Middle Eastern culture. We can see here in Western culture, the girl in the swimsuit saying everything covered but her eyes. What a cruel male-dominated culture. While in Middle Eastern cultures, you have nothing covered but her eyes. What a cruel male-dominated culture. You can see that it is accepted here in Western nations where this is like beachwear, that's totally accepted, versus in Middle Eastern countries where it's covering for your body. That is what cultural acceptance is, and to be able to understand that. Cultural pluralism is respect between various groups in society for another's culture. This is basically what allows different cultures to coexist within the same society. Where you will see in different, like for example, immigrants coming over, you're able to understand culture, understand what goes on, how people thrive and how they live, and that allows these two cultures to be able to get along. And that concludes our mini lecture today on culture.